And we're excited to have you join Registrar Corp for Unpacking US FDA Food Labeling and Ingredient Regulation, what companies must know before exporting. We'll be discussing the ingredient and labeling rules and regulations for food products distributed in the US. I'm proud to introduce Anna Benavente, Registrar Corp's Director of Regulatory Affairs, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the College of William and Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box, and we've saved time at the end to answer them. We'll also follow up with a link to the recording so that you can refer back to this at any time. Without further ado, Anna, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Christina. I'm very excited to be able to present to you all today. These are the topics that we'll be covering in our webinar. First, we will discuss what every food company must know before they start exporting food products to the U.S., FDA's oversight of foods, and two very important questions that every company must ask related to their ingredients and their labels. In our next section, we'll describe how a company determines if their product's ingredients are acceptable to the FDA. We'll go over how FDA regulates them and designates them as safe, and common mistakes that are made by food companies before they ship. We'll also discuss the new policies being implemented for color additives. We'll follow up with the labeling requirements that all food labels must meet. All the general mandatory labeling elements will be described, and we'll go over additional labeling considerations, such as nutrient and organic claims, as well as some new guidance from FDA related to allergens. We'll also discuss the new requirement for the claim that a product is healthy, and touch upon the proposed rule FDA has issued regarding front of package labeling, as well as the common mistakes made in labeling. And then finally, we'll present to you Registrar Corp's solution to help your companies achieve compliance and ensure trouble-free exportation to the US. And so then we'll finish up with our question and answer period and try to get to as many of them as we can. Now, so for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients in over 190 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. We are very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of service to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. We offer over 25 different services and software options to help your firm achieve compliance with your information protected by a system that is ISO 27001 certified and backed by a team of regulatory experts totaling over 460 years of experience. Our product labeling and ingredient review team, along with our import alert team of experienced professionals, hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, and cosmetic sciences. And we take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements. Now, as most people know, the U.S. food market is incredibly large, with revenues of almost $1 trillion projected in 2025. So for many companies, exportation to the U.S. is a significant way, even in these days, to increase the value and financial growth of their businesses. Companies that successfully export to the U.S. can often count upon a consistent revenue stream in a market that continues to expand. However, many pitfalls can occur between a company and its financial windfall in the U.S. market. FDA regulations are strict, and so a company should ask itself before it exports, what do I need to know? In the next section of this webinar, we'll describe how a company should ensure that its food products are appropriate for the U.S. market. Now, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has jurisdiction over most foods in the U.S. market. Under their authority, they issue strict regulations regarding what ingredients may be used in food products. They also have complicated regulations that govern the labeling of food products. These regulations specify what must appear on the label as well as rules regarding claims that may be made about the products. So many companies make the critical mistake of thinking that FDA regulations only apply to domestic U.S. producers, but this is not the case. Imported foods must also comply with FDA requirements upon entry. FDA inspects food import and will not release products that have improper ingredients or labeling, even if the importer intends to change the label after it arrives. Products must be compliant when they arrive at that port of entry. So smart companies will ask themselves two very important questions before shipping. One, are my ingredients permitted? And two, is the labeling correct? These two issues are extremely common causes for problems for imported foods in U.S. ports. So a company may ask itself, though, why this even matters. Many companies ship for years without any issues. However, it is important to note that FDA does conduct inspections in port, particularly on goods from new shippers. If a non-compliant product is found, it is usually detained. Rarely will FDA let non-compliant goods in with only a warning. Now, if a product has an illegal ingredient, it will usually be refused entry since there's no way to remove it from the product. Products with labeling errors can be relabeled if the importer petitions FDA successfully. However, this process is expensive and time-consuming, as FDA must approve the petition and then inspect the goods after relabeling. This process can take months to resolve and can easily damage your business relationships. Also, a package with stickers covering non-compliant information is not very attractive to consumers and then could negatively impact your sales. Violations can also result in a company being placed on what's called an import alert, whereby all future shipments of the product will be detained without any inspection by FDA. And so this can cripple your business in the US. So the consequences of non-compliance can be very severe. In the past year, we became involved with a detention for canned green beans and kidney beans that had been stopped for misbranding. The labeling lacked a proper net quantity statement and did not have the mandatory nutrition facts chart on the label. The importer reached out to us, and we quickly determined that we could request permission to relabel, since that was all that was wrong with the products. But the importer had no idea how to develop compliant labels, so he used our Label Comply service, through which we developed compliant labels for both products, including fixing issues that FDA had not noticed, but could have been an issue if left unaddressed. We then drafted the 766 request, that's what it's called, with the completed form, copies of the original and revised labels, and an explanation of how precisely the revised labels addressed every violation, including the regulatory citations, so that FDA would know that experts had been involved. And to be sure that FDA would know that the end result would be a compliant label, we included before and after pictures to show what the results of reconditioning would look like. We met the respond by date and got it approved. So the importer was allowed to relabel, and then we helped arrange for reinspection after it was complete so that the goods would be released. It's a very involved and complex process, particularly drafting that 766 form. You want to be sure that you address any possible reason that FDA could deny the petition. Sometimes if they deny it, they will let you submit another, but not always. It's best to get it right the first time. And so while there is a happy ending to this story, it did take about 2 to 3 months to resolve, as FDA can take weeks to respond. And there's also the time necessary to relabel every single product in the shipment. And we had a similar situation with a seasoning product that was labeled for the Chinese market and brought to the US by an importer interested in selling it here. FDA detained it for labeling violations, including the lack of a nutrition facts chart. However, FDA refused to accept nutrient values from the manufacturer and insisted that the products be tested by a US laboratory. They gave the importer a very short time to respond. So the importer was forced to pay for an expedited analysis by that lab before we could even begin to develop a new label. The importer successfully relabeled the product, but FDA took a long time to come and inspect the shipment. So the entire process took about 3 months. The takeaway here is that detentions are expensive, time-consuming, and a huge problem for our supply chain. They must be avoided at all costs. So how does one even go about figuring out whether the products are okay or whether they might be in danger of being detained? So you have two basic steps to eliminate some of this risk. One, is my formulation okay? Conduct a check of your ingredients to make sure that they are permitted in the US. Then select only those products with formulations that will be acceptable to FDA. Two, is my labeling okay? For these selected products, review the labeling and revise as necessary before shipping. Remember, relabeling import is expensive and time-consuming if FDA even allows you to do it. Prevent the need for relabeling by making sure it's correct before you export. Now, many companies are uncertain as how to determine if their ingredients are acceptable for the US market. And in this section of the webinar, we'll explain how FDA regulates ingredients and where they publish their regulations. To understand if your ingredients are okay, it's important to understand the current regulatory framework that FDA has in place. It results in three primary classifications for ingredients: food additives, GRAS substances, and color additives. By law, all substances added to food must be approved by FDA unless they are generally recognized as safe. The responsibility lies with the industry to actually submit a food additive petition to FDA with data to support the safety for the substance's use in food. FDA generally doesn't do this independently. Then there are also substances deemed as prior sanctioned, as they were approved by FDA prior to 1958. Color additives, even those from natural sources, must all be approved by FDA. They are never considered GRAS. They will require the submission of a color additive petition by industry to support the safety of their use in food. Now, GRAS substances are those that are generally recognized as safe for their intended use. They are excluded from the definition of a food additive and are not subject to those approval requirements. Now, in order to figure out if your ingredient falls into one of these categories, you will need to research some specific resources. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations includes all of the food additives and color additives that have been approved by FDA. It also includes regulations where FDA has affirmed certain substances are GRAS. It is important to pay close attention to the regulations, as they will tell you exactly what products and intended uses are covered. For example, some are permitted just generally in food, but others may be limited to only particular types of food or for certain specific functions or uses. GRAS status is not limited to these GRAS affirmations. GRAS status is based upon the opinion of the entire scientific community as a whole. So companies, for now, are permitted to self-affirm an ingredient as GRAS using data that is public or privately held. If a company chooses to self-affirm an ingredient as GRAS, then they should make sure that they have the data available in the event that FDA requests proof of their ingredient status. Now, FDA has a process by which a company may submit what's called a GRAS notice to inform FDA that they have determined that an ingredient is GRAS. FDA may then respond whether they have any questions or concerns regarding the company's data and the company's conclusion that the substance is safe. Now, keeping up with ingredient regulations and doing a thorough check is extremely important, as regulations do change from time to time. So, for example, this year FDA has banned FD&C Red number 3, a common color additive used in all sorts of products, specifically candy. FDA is revoking the authorization and will enforce it beginning January 15th, 2027 for food products. They have requested that industry voluntarily remove it ahead of this deadline. Now, if you are using this color, you should start the reformulation process now to ensure that it is removed from all your products that are destined for the US market. You will also want to ensure that your supply chain is vetted so that products containing this color do not accidentally get sent to the US. Now, FDA has also stated plans to revoke the approval for citrus red number 2 and orange B. In fact, this morning they announced a proposed amendment related to the removal of orange B. And these are 2 other synthetic color additives, but that are not really widely used. Now, there has been quite a bit of activity recently regarding color additives, particularly these types of synthetic colors. The administration has announced an initiative to push for voluntary phase out by industry for all other synthetic approved color additives by the end of 2026. Now, this would include common color additives such as FD&C red number 40, yellow number 5, and blue number 1. Now, there was some skepticism, including by yours truly, that industry would comply, but then on June 17th, Kraft announced their plan to remove all synthetic colors by the end of 2027, and others have followed since. Nestle, PepsiCo, and General Mills have all made similar announcements in the last few months. So to encourage the use of naturally sourced colors, FDA has approved additional naturally sourced color additives like calcium phosphate, Galdiera extract blue, gardenia genopin blue, and then added new approvals for butterfly pea flower extract. We know that there are also other petitions that are currently under review right now by FDA. Now, the GRAS system is also on their radar and has been targeted for significant changes. So the most groundbreaking change this year, or disruptive, depending on your viewpoint, is the stated intent to eliminate self-affirmation as a means to establish the GRAS status for an ingredient. FDA has announced plans to explore potential rulemaking to revise the GRAS final rule and to work with Congress to explore ways that legislation can close what they call the GRAS loophole. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kennedy, has asserted that companies exploit this loophole to allow new chemicals with unknown safety data into the US marketplace with no notification to FDA or the public. So elimination of this pathway would then force companies to notify FDA and provide data to support an ingredient's safety. Their opinion is that elimination of this pathway will result in greater transparency for the consumer. Now, actions like this will take time, though, as rulemaking is very complex and requires proposed and final rules, as well as possibly an act of Congress. So I would suggest that you stay updated by signing up for our blogs. If FDA makes such a groundbreaking change, we'll be sure to notify you and give you the necessary information to stay compliant. We do know that FDA has targeted a proposed rule potentially this fall to eliminate this pathway. And we'll have to see, though, whether or not they meet this deadline. Now, unfortunately, many companies don't perform any sort of compliance check on their products prior to shipping, and then they find out the hard way that the ingredients are not permitted in the US market. So one of the most common mistakes are illegal colors, because FDA must approve every color additive, even those from safe natural sources. And colors that are common in other markets, such as Ponceau 4R and Cormacine, are not permitted in the US. Other common color additive issues concern colors that are subject to a batch certification requirement from FDA. For these colors, a sample from the actual batch must be sent to FDA for them to test it. So for example, Allura Red must be certified by FDA as FD&C Red number 40. Brilliant Blue is another example. It must be certified as FD&C Blue number 1. Now, other ingredients that can cause issues are artificial sweeteners, such as cyclamates and dulcin, which are not approved by FDA. Now, recently, FDA issued a final order that essentially bans partially hydrogenated oils due to their trans fat content. So products from other markets where they are permitted should not be sent to the US. Now, stevia is a very popular sweetener that's being used in a lot of products these days, but know that it has purity specifications that must be met. And so FDA has an import alert for it, along with other ingredients such as tamarind, where FDA will stop these products and force the importer to prove that they meet FDA's requirements before entering the US market. So they can still enter, but the burden is on the importer to provide some additional data to FDA. And then finally, CBD. CBD is confusing because individual states in the US do permit it, but at the federal level, it is not permitted to be added to food. Okay, so next step that we're going to take is to talk about the labeling requirements. So again, this is the other part of the check that you should perform before you ship your products to the US. Now, there are certain statements that must almost always appear on food labeling, as shown here, and we'll discuss these in depth in the next few slides. Now, first and foremost is the statement of identity. So that's what the product actually is. FDA requires that it be the name specified by law, or the common or usual name used in the marketplace, but not a brand name, or a fanciful name that is understood by the general public. So for example, most of us probably are familiar with the brand Oreo and understand what that is, but that is not a statement of identity. Oreo labels include a statement of identity, chocolate sandwich cookies, to meet this requirement. Now, some products are subject to what is called a standard of identity. This is when FDA dictates what the characteristics are for a product that is identified by a particular name. And this can include permitted ingredients or certain manufacturing methods that must be conducted. So examples might include ice cream, jam, margarine, and peanut butter. And so for right now, there are over 250 standards of identity. FDA is revoking some of them, but a lot of them remain in place. So you will want to determine if your product is subject to one. The statement of identity is also subject to certain requirements based on flavor declarations, if there are juice ingredients, when a product is in a specific form, and more. Now, the next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container. Solid and viscous products are declared by weight and must include the term or the abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are to be declared in terms of volume. Know that you must include both the metric and imperial terms of measurement. So in other words, ounces as well as grams. And this is another common cause for detention. So for example, if a product that does not declare its weight in both of those can be detained for that reason. Now, every food product label needs to declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. You can choose any of these three options to meet the requirement, but do note that it must include the actual corporate name for that entity and the full address, although you may omit the street address if it is found in a local directory. Ideally, FDA needs to have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover that there's a problem with the product, which is the need behind this statement. Now, most foods, except for single ingredient foods, must declare all of their ingredients on the package. So most of these ingredients have to be declared by their common or usual name. So no E or INS numbers can be included. Most of them have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses. They must be in descending order by weight. However, there are some exemptions to these rules for certain ingredients, such as natural and artificial flavors, colors, and some spices. Now, a few years ago, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, issued new rules regarding the disclosure of bioengineered ingredients. So how this works is USDA maintains a list of foods that are generally considered to be genetically modified. And if your food product has an ingredient on this list, or if you know that any ingredient in your product is subject to bioengineering, then you must disclose it on the label. USDA gives several different options, including the use of a symbol. And so even though this rule was issued by USDA, it impacts FDA-regulated product labeling as well. Then, while not an FDA requirement, it is important to know that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. This is defined as the country where the last substantial transformation took place, and it must appear on all retail food labels. Also, you may only use abbreviations for countries that are deemed acceptable by customs. So, for example, PRC is not an acceptable abbreviation for China, as a U.S. consumer may not be familiar with it and would not realize that it stands for the People's Republic of China. Now, the next and most difficult part of the mandatory food labeling is the nutrition facts label. FDA has very specific requirements for format, content, and type sizes. And unlike some markets where nutrition labeling is simply based on 100 gram or 100 milliliter amounts, for FDA nutrition charts, a serving size must be declared based on the reference amount for that exact food that has been established by FDA. You don't get to actually choose it. And there's also an additional dual column chart requirement for products that are in packages that might be consumed in a single sitting or in a unit that might be consumed in a single sitting. Then there are also different formats for infant and toddler foods and when there's more than one product in a package. So we pulled together some examples from other countries to illustrate how different the FDA chart is. So here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from the UK, Australia, and Mexico. So again, they're very different. So it's very obvious to FDA inspectors when a product comes in with a label that's not in compliance with this requirement. Any inspector that sees this mistake is bound to detain the product and refuse it unless the importer petitions for permission to relabel it. Now, FDA does have multiple chart formats and regulation that are permitted on food labeling, subject to certain conditions. So to the left, we see the simplified format, which is permitted on certain products that don't have a lot of nutrient value. So you might like candy, gum, soda, that sort of thing. Then on the upper right side of the panel and at the bottom side of the panel, we see two tabular charts that are permitted on certain sized packaging. And in the middle is the linear format, permitted only on very small packaging. So if you choose to use any of these nutrition facts panels, you must make sure that your product and your package qualify. Now, as I mentioned earlier, other product packaging will now require the dual column format, which is shown in the bottom right, where the product is in a package that is 2 to 3 times the size of the FDA reference amount for that food, or is in a unit that's 2 to 3 times the size of the FDA reference amount. Now, allergens are a very important part of food labeling and a very common cause for product recalls and other similar issues. So accurate allergen declarations are an important safety and labeling issue. As we can all imagine, undeclared allergens are also a significant regulatory and legal liability too. So if a consumer has an allergic reaction to your product and it was not properly labeled, it could open your firm to the threat of legal action and significant financial losses. Now, FDA has 9 mandatory food allergens that require disclosure on the label: milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. You may declare them as part of the ingredient name, such as wheat flour, in parentheses next to the ingredient in that ingredients list, or declare all of them in a contained statement adjacent to the list. Now, this year, FDA has updated its guidance on allergens and informed us that coconut is no longer considered a tree nut and does not have to be included in this statement. Now, sometimes allergens become present due to cross-contamination in food processing facility, on a production line, that sort of thing. So in such cases, it may be smart to add advisory labeling, such as may contain or produced on equipment that also processes that allergen. Now, FDA acknowledges use of these sorts of statements. They're voluntary, there's no regulation for them. But FDA does warn companies that they are not a suitable replacement for rigorous manufacturing practices to mitigate the chance that that cross-contamination takes place. Now, in addition to regulations regarding the mandatory statements that must appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to other labeling issues such as claims. FDA dictates when such claims can be made. So, for example, nutrient content claims refer to levels of a nutrient in a food, such as high in fiber, low fat, or healthy. So FDA sets nutrient levels that must be met in order to bear that claim. Health claims refer to a risk reduction in disease that may occur due to the consumption of the food. This is the only time an actual disease can be referenced on a food label. And these health claims must be pre-approved by FDA, and they are put into regulation. Structure function claims reference the effects to the structure or function of the body due to consumption of the food. So these claims are not pre-approved by FDA, but must be truthful, substantiated, and based on the nutritive value of the food. So an example of this might be calcium builds strong bones. Now, another common labeling element are additional languages. Note that your labels must have all the mandatory statements in English. If any other language is present, then all mandatory statements must appear in that language too. Now, brand names and mottos may be exempt from this requirement though, as they do not convey any sort of material information about the product. Now, due to a strong marketing advantage and consumer desire for clean labels, organic foods are now a significant part of the US market. In order to make this claim, your food will need to be certified by an agent that is accredited by the USDA unless there's a memorandum of understanding between your country and the USDA. The claim itself will be based upon the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, and usually the agent's information must appear on the label. Now, in December of 2024, FDA issued a new rule that drastically changes the requirements to call a food healthy on the labeling. Companies will have until February 25th, 2028 to update their labeling to incorporate the new regulation. The previous regulation focused on individual nutrients and required certain levels of fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium, as well as mandating that the product contain at least 10% of the daily value of a nutrient from a very specific list, such as calcium, iron, and dietary fiber. Now, this old rule was issued in the 1990s, and while there were some modifications to it in the last 10 years or so, it still reflected outdated thinking about nutrition. The new regulation incorporates a better understanding of human nutrition, and it focuses on foods as a whole and the need for healthy dietary patterns, and shifts the focus away from levels of individual nutrients. The new requirements focus on whole food groups like vegetables and foods that will qualify if they have a certain number of food group equivalents. Also, products like water, tea, and coffee, and certain oils that are low in saturated fat like olive oil will automatically qualify. Now, front of package labeling has been present in the marketplace for quite a few years, and up to this point has been voluntary. And there are many ways that it's added to food labels. Some systems have used symbols to characterize the overall nutrient value of a food. Others have focused on individual nutrient levels. And up till now, FDA has only objected if the agency has determined that the front of package statements were false or misleading, or if they were in violation of the regulations that govern nutrient content claims. However, in its mission to help consumers make healthier food choices, FDA has issued a proposed rule to require front of package labeling on most food products. FDA's proposed rule will require a nutrition info box that lists the percent daily values of saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars, and then characterizes them as low, medium, or high. This will be required for most foods intended for people aged 4 years and older, so it would not be required for toddler or infant foods. There will also be a voluntary declaration of calories that can be made adjacent to the box. And FDA will have special labeling provisions for certain packages, like small packages and that sort of thing. Now, note that this is only proposed. It is not final and it could change. We have seen that FDA is anticipating that it will actually issue the final rule for this next year, potentially May of next year. But again, this is only proposed and it could change dramatically, which is what we saw with the change to the nutrition facts label in 2016. The final version was very different from what was proposed in 2014. So do not add this to your food labels yet. So again, FDA has provided that estimated date and it's on the agency's agenda to be published in May 2026. That doesn't mean it's carved in stone. FDA could miss the deadline, which happens from time to time, but good to know that it is actually on their agenda. So again, need to be mindful of these common mistakes. Companies need to be vigilant in ensuring that their labels meet FDA's requirement. So here are some common ones, many which we find routinely on products that we review. So again, it's very common for other markets to allow ingredients to be declared by E numbers or INS numbers, but that's not the case here. Usually it's common or usual name. Now, we often will see companies that are using nutrition charts that are only permitted on small packages, not understanding the limitations of their use. And then because the majority of the world uses the metric system, many labels arrive to the US without the mandatory declaration in ounces or fluid ounces. Keep in mind, you have to have both. And it's very common for labels to bear claims such as, high in vitamin A, but the product doesn't have enough of the nutrient to qualify. And then last but not least, if there's any non-English statement on your label other than a brand name or a motto, you will probably need to reproduce all of the mandatory statements in that language. Okay, so we hope that the information that we've presented gives you a good overview of how to check your product's formulation and labeling to determine if it meets FDA's requirements. Now, if you still find that the rules and regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. Registrar Corp has many solutions to help you make sure that your labels meet FDA's requirements. So we offer varying levels of assistance to meet your exact needs. As we've mentioned before, it's critical to make sure that your formulation consists only of ingredients that are permitted in the US market, as well as making sure that the labeling is correct. Our Label Comply service gives you one-on-one assistance with an experienced regulatory specialist who will do a complete evaluation of your ingredients and labeling. We conduct a thorough analysis of the label for each of the mandatory statements we've discussed today and make recommendations for changes to bring your label and product into compliance. We issue a report that includes all of our recommendations, and we will provide you with a print-ready graphic that has been revised to be in compliance with these requirements. The service also includes a 30-day period where you can ask questions and have an extra round of graphic changes to the revised label at no additional charge. Also, any client that uses our Label Comply service can count on our continued support as long as they use our revised label. If FDA questions any label we produce, Registrar Corp will intervene at no cost to you to communicate with FDA and then provide research that we conducted to support the compliance of the label. Now, if you're feeling pretty confident that your product label is compliant, but you still want the reassurance of a group of specialists to look it over, Registrar Corp offers our label check report option. Our team will look over the 10 mandatory elements that should appear on your label and give you guidance regarding any potential issues that we find, and then instructions on what changes you should make before exporting it to the US. The report will summarize the changes, and you'll receive 30 minutes of consultation after delivery to talk through our findings. Now, if you're feeling pretty confident about the labeling, but do want some help with that complicated nutrition facts label, Registrar Corp offers a service that will give you one-on-one assistance from a regulatory specialist who will help you figure out the proper reference amount and the serving size for your product, as well as the proper modified label format that may be permitted for your product and your package. We will provide you with a print-ready graphic and a report that details each recommendation and regulation that was used to develop your nutrition facts label. Now, for companies that are still in the process of developing their formulations or that are concerned that their ingredients may not be approved, Registrar Corp's Ingredients Review Service can provide you with peace of mind prior to export. We will review all of the ingredients in your products to verify that they're safe, or approved as food additives, or approved as color additives by FDA. So you can save yourself the heartache of a refused shipment or a warning letter that's visible to all your customers by ensuring that your ingredients are permitted before you export. For companies that have a good working knowledge of the nutrition facts requirements, Registrar Corp also offers a do-it-yourself solution. Our nutrition labeling software and recipe management tool will help you produce your nutrition labeling for the US and other markets. Our software solution offers downloadable charts for the US, UK, Canadian, Mexican, and EU markets based off of a single recipe for the product. It is subscription-based with lots of flexibility depending on your needs. And we have many other ways that we can help you as you market your foods in the US. We offer a full range of compliance services, all of which are fixed fee. We can assist you with many FDA requirements, such as food facility registration, US agent, prior notice, labeling, low acid and canned food requirements, food safety plans, and then services to meet the requirements of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. We can also help you if your products are being detained or are on an import alert. If you get detained, don't give up right away. Send us the FDA's notice of action for a free assessment, and we can see if and how you may be able to get them released. We also offer custom consulting on any number of matters related to FDA regulation and enforcement. You can harness our expertise to solve your most complex product challenges. We can offer you subject matter expertise tailored to your exact needs for however long you need it. So partner with us to ensure that your products meet FDA's requirements. We look forward to assisting you with your successful distribution of your products to the US market. And we're also pleased to announce the launch of our label review services for Canada and Mexico. We offer the Label Comply and Label Check services to prepare your product labeling so you may market your product in Canada. We also have the Label Comply service along with the constancia that is necessary to ensure your product labels compliance in the Mexican market. So if you plan to market in either country, please reach out to us if you need any assistance. Now, are you unsure whether your product labels are compliant? We are here to help. You can send your product labels to us for a free assessment. We will check to see if they appear to have any compliance issues related to the mandatory labeling requirements we've discussed today. Our team of regulatory advisors will provide you with our comments and can give you information regarding our services in case you need to change your labels before you ship them to the US, Mexico, or Canada. Simply navigate to the label and ingredient review section under food and beverage on our webpage to find the link to upload your labels. Within approximately 24 to 48 hours, we'll provide you with our comments regarding your label's compliance and whether they should be updated prior to shipping. And we do have a special discount for you all as our thanks for attending the webinar today. You will receive $200 off the full Label Comply service or $100 off the Label Check service between now and October 31st. Simply mention it to your regulatory advisor and the discount will be applied. Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and we really appreciate it. So I hope you found it helpful. And with that, we'll open up our webinar. I'll hand it back over to Christina for any questions that you may have. So please feel free to add them to the top of the Q&A box and on the top of your screen. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Anna. So we got a lot of really great questions. I'll go ahead and start with what our most frequently asked question was which is regarding label requirements for products not intended for retail sale. So products that are B2B, wholesale, for industry, what type of label requirements, should be considered?
Okay, so generally speaking, products that are bulk or wholesale usually do not have as stringent requirements as those for retail. The biggest difference typically is going to be that the nutrition facts label is not going to be required for that type of product, because a consumer won't see it, or if it's in the case of like an ingredient, there may not be a reference amount for it, that's been established by FDA. However, generally speaking, we strongly recommend that the rest of the labeling requirements that we've talked about today be included, so that it is very clear to an FDA inspector the nature of the product and that it's going to be compliant with FDA requirements. We generally also, even though it's not written into regulation, would recommend a statement such as, for food service only, for wholesale only, or something along those lines.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anna. So our next question is regarding bilingual labeling. We have someone wondering, can a bilingual nutrition facts label be used in the United States? And is it acceptable for the Spanish version to appear first?
Okay, so with bilingual labeling in general, you are going to need to have a bilingual nutrition facts chart. Now, you are permitted to have them either presented together in one chart. FDA's example shows the English first, followed by the Spanish. And so we would recommend adhering to that as well. But you are permitted to have two separate charts if you like. So sometimes with certain product packages, like the one that pops into mind would be like those little 200 milliliter juice boxes. We see a lot of those that come through for review. And for those, it is impossible to get a bilingual nutrition facts chart to fit. So like in a case like that, then you can have two separate charts. But if you do combine them, put the English first would be our recommendation.
Okay, great. And then kind of jumping off that, we have another bilingual question here. So if they have both English and Spanish on their label, does the Spanish need to have the same text size as the English text?
Yes, excellent question. Even though it's Spanish, it's still one of the mandatory statements. So any Spanish statements would need to meet those minimum type size requirements as well. One of the things that I'll tell you too is that even if it's meeting the minimum type size requirements, if the English is larger, I would still go ahead and make them the same size. A lot of the good advice to avoid having FDA stop and hold your product and inspect it only to determine that, yes, it is in compliance. But meanwhile, weeks have gone by and your buyer is getting upset. Try and make it just look as compliant as possible when it comes through, so that, the inspector takes a look, sees that, these requirements are being adhered to, everything looks great, and just, lets it in, versus stopping it, holding it, starting to ask questions, and again, causing delays. Even if it turns out that it was fine, you're still, weeks behind, and that's just a problem. So best to avoid even, inspection at any costs too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So this next one is another labeling question. So what do you do when your packaging doesn't have enough space to include all of the information? Like, for example, a sachet. Do they accept QR code link, or is there another workaround that FDA permits?
Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. At this point in time, QR codes and websites and that sort of thing are not written into regulation as an acceptable labeling format. Now for sachets, it may depend on whether or not it's enclosed in an outer box. So there are some exemptions from the labeling requirements. If, for example, you have 24 sachets of a drink mix in an outer box, that does conform to all of the requirements. So there's some labeling exemptions for inner packages like that. Now, if it's sold just by itself as a sachet, some of those nutrition chart, like the linear format that I showed on that one slide, that might be a possibility. And then for really small packaging, there is an exemption where you can put a phone number or an address where a consumer can receive. Now that's, our understanding is that is mailing address though. The regulation practically predates the internet, I think. And so I think it's safe to say they're probably mean a mailing address or a phone number where a consumer can then contact to get that information.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this next question is about the nutrition facts chart. Can you clarify when a 2-column nutritional table applies?
Okay, great. Excellent question. So yeah, and this is brand new. This was never in regulation before. It's a new concept. And it really boils down, frankly, to the obesity epidemic that we have in our country. And it's designed to make consumers aware when either the entire package, like think of like maybe a 70-gram package of chips, or if the product is in a unit, like those really ginormous, like Otis Spunkmeyer muffins, they're huge, and delicious, but huge, when either the unit or the package is 2 to 3 times the size of that reference amount serving size that FDA has established. And so the idea is that a consumer, they begin eating that package of chips or that entire muffin, has that information in front of them to show them the amount of calories and fat and all those kind of detrimental nutrients that will be consumed if they consume the entire bag or the entire muffin. Is really what it boils down to.
Great, makes sense. All right, so our next question is shifting into the bioengineered food disclosure. So this company wants to know, if a product is not sourced from genetically modified organisms, does the company need to include the bioengineered food disclosure on the label?
Okay, so there are the 2 most common ingredients on the USDA list that come to mind are corn and soy, which USDA just generally says, okay, these are genetically modified. If you have, though, data to support that your particular ingredient is not genetically modified, you do not have to have this symbol on your packaging or the statement on the packaging. However, strongly recommend keeping that data handy in case there's ever any question about the fact that the product label does not include that symbol or a statement that the product contains a bioengineered ingredient. But yes, you can omit it if you can prove that the products are not genetically modified.
Okay, great. So the next question is regarding chocolate. So this company says that FDA has a guidance for how to declare chocolate as a characterizing flavor in non-standardized food. They're wondering if dark chocolate is a term that can be used on labeling.
So really good question. One of the most surprising things I discovered when I started reviewing foods 15 years ago is that FDA doesn't actually have any sort of definition for dark chocolate. They have definitions for white chocolate and milk chocolate and some other cacao products in regulation that you have to adhere to. So in the case of a dark chocolate product, what you've suggested is exactly what we would do. Look at that compliance policy guide, make sure that it meets the definition and the characteristics for being called chocolate. In essence, it has, one of the ingredients that is found in 21 CFR 163 for cacao products. And then, it's really just sort of boils down to whether or not the product would meet what the consumer would expect dark chocolate to consist of. And so, and I think a lot of times industry will include that percent cacao on the label just so that it's clear, since there's not a formal standardized definition for dark chocolate. But yes, your approach is exactly what we would do, is look at that CPG and make sure that it meets those requirements.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is regarding partially hydrogenated oils. So this person is asking if, the regulation the FDA has regarding partially hydrogenated oils applies to a product that is 100% partially hydrogenated oils, or does it also apply to products that contain some percentage of partially hydrogenated oils in them? And are they still allowed to be shipped to the USA?
Our understanding is that it would apply to both. So it was a number of years ago, FDA issued a final order, in essence, not permitting partially hydrogenated oils in foods at all. And we see products get detained if they have partially hydrogenated oils. This order has been in effect now for a number of years. And so we strongly recommend do not send it either as a single ingredient product or as if it's in a product, finished food product as one of the ingredients, just simply don't send it. They're just not permitted here because of the trans fat content.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. So this is another great question. Is FDA considering any new rules related to nutrition information and labeling for alcoholic products, such as wine?
Okay, so excellent question. The way that wines or alcoholic beverages in general, most of them are regulated by our Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau, Alcohol Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, so TTB. Vast majority fall under TTB. And TTB is going to, in theory, according to their agenda, start issuing rules about nutrition labeling on alcoholic beverages that they oversee. So, again, sign up for our blogs. If it comes out, we're going to be blogging about it nonstop, I'm pretty sure, because we have a number of clients that actually have TTB regulated alcoholic beverages. We actually do label reviews for them as well. If you're interested in label review, we have services for that. Now, the FDA does have jurisdiction over wines that are less than 7% alcohol. And so if you have a product like that, it's subject to the FDA labeling requirements, which include, of course, the nutrition facts label and everything that we've discussed today. So those all will apply to the wines that are less than 7%. There's also a subcategory of malt beverages. If they're not made with hops and malted barley, then they fall under FDA instead of TTB. But all other malt beverages, distilled spirits, even ones that are mixed, like those sort of prefab, vodka sodas and things in cans, those all fall under TTB along with most of the wines. And again, those may end up being subject to nutrition labeling in the coming year.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this next question is regarding FDA inspections in port. So is the check by FDA done targeting high-risk foods, or is it completely random?
It is not completely random. FDA has limited resources. When you think about, there's some crazy number, like 2 billion lines of products coming through, each year into the US. And so, of course, FDA does not have enough, people to inspect every single thing. So they do have sort of a targeting system where they will focus in on high-risk foods, so things like, seafood or, fresh fruits or vegetables or things like that, or products that are canned or bottled and are subject to the food canning establishment and submission identifier requirements. And then also new shippers. If somebody has no shipping history to the US, those people also may end up with a higher incidence of being inspected. But sometimes it can just be completely random, even though crackers might be your, classic example of a low risk food. We do see, detention of products like crackers. Oftentimes it's because it's a new shipper, and oftentimes they don't have the labeling that's required. And so then they end up detained.
Okay, great. So looking at the time, it looks like we might have time for just one or two other questions. So here's a good one for international companies. So this person says, we are a UK producer of dry rub spices for the UK and Europe. We've started shipping to the US, but do not want to have separate packaging. Is it permissible to have 2 nutrition information labels, one for the UK and then one for the US?
Unfortunately, from what we have seen, FDA does not accept when there's a separate nutrition facts for a different market. We've seen this being commented upon in a lot of detention orders where there's labeling violations are spelled out, and it includes having the nutrition facts label in a different country's format, even when the FDA format is present. So I know it's such a hassle, and it's a huge hurdle sometimes to create different packaging for the US. What we can suggest is that you are permitted to use stickers. If you can make stickers that resemble the outer packaging, so at least it's not unattractive, but to cover the non-compliant nutrition chart and cover it with a US version, that may be a possibility. But unfortunately, we do discover that FDA does not consider that an appropriate appropriate labeling for the US market.
All right, thank you. And then I guess one final quick question to round us out. Do you also offer support on USDA for those applicable products?
Yes, thank you. We do offer labeling support as well as the label approval process for USDA regulated foods. In fact, you're right now looking at our specialist, and that is not me, that does all of these. So Christina has a ton of experience with USDA labeling and with actually submitting the labels for approval. USDA is different than FDA in that products with certain claims like grass-fed beef, or Christine can probably tell you better than I can, the ones that trigger the label approval requirement. And so if you have products that are regulated by USDA, which generally speaking is a lot of egg products, meat and poultry that have greater than 2% cooked or 3% raw meat or poultry, those fall under USDA rather than FDA, and yes, we can assist.
Awesome, thank you so much. And with that, we will conclude our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today, everyone. Please do take our survey to give us feedback, and please feel free to suggest any additional topics you would like to see us cover in future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.